Hey guys. So one of the biggest complaints that I get from scientists who tell stories with us is that they're not allowed to use slides. They say it would be so much easier if only I had slides to lean on and read, and of course that's exactly the reason why we don't let them use slides, right? But tonight, since it's our night, I thought I'd see what all the hype is about. I have some slides for you all. Get pumped for slides, only at Story Collider. Scientists sometimes do this thing that I think is actually really badass, where they click the slide without even looking back. Liz does this a lot. I think it's very cool. I'm going to try to do it as much as I can, but I don't know. I'm not a professional. Bear with me. But I wanted tonight, after years of asking scientists to tell their stories in our format, I wanted to tell our story in their format. So, 7 years and some change ago, just a few months after the first Story Collider show, Ben asked me to be a part of it. Ben, one of the co-founders of Story Collider and the owner of the place that we are sitting in right now. I already looked back. I already ruined it. I know. And when he asked me this, I was really excited because I really loved this show already, even though there'd only been a few. But I was also a little hesitant because I thought, maybe this isn't my world. Because if you guys can't tell already, I'm not a scientist. I'm a civilian, or a muggle, as we sometimes say. And so I was worried that I didn't really have what it took to help run this show. And so I said to Ben, I would love to, but I feel like I should tell you, I don't know anything about science. And he said, I know. That's why I asked you. Which is either a compliment or an insult. I don't know. I'm still trying to work that out 7 years later. But I did end up joining, and it's an incredible experience. For 2 years, we worked nights and weekends really hard to get this show off the ground and to keep doing it every month in New York and expanding to Boston until finally, after a couple years, I was lucky enough that this became my full-time job. And at that point, it took on a new level of importance for me, not just because it was now my professional focus, but also because things were changing. We became a nonprofit organization. I should move over here because actually I think I am going to have to look at them. I'm sorry to disappoint you all. We started working with amazing partners like Springer Nature. Things were really taking off. So many things were changing. We were expanding to different cities all around the country. And then further away than that, even, we had a team of freelance producers all around the world. And then most importantly, I got a co-director. Imagine that everything your mother ever wanted you to be came together and coalesced into one person. And that was the person you worked directly with every day. I mean, this is like a stock photo of a competent yet compassionate professional. You would put this in your company's brochure. I found this challenging for a while, especially when she mentioned things like she mentioned earlier about measuring stories. I was like, no, my soul. But after a while, I really started to appreciate that Liz is a person who deeply cares about this organization as much as I do. And I appreciated the fact that our differences made us stronger. We challenge each other in that way. And I also appreciated that because of her, we were now doing things like bookkeeping and following the law, which I'm told is very important. So with all of this happening, I really wanted to honor everything that everyone else was putting into this organization. I wanted to honor this team of producers who were putting in this work. I wanted to honor our donors' contributions. I wanted to honor the fact that Liz was essentially doing the work of 5 different people to manage this organization. And so it became really important to me to make excellent shows, excellent podcasts, the best stories that we could produce. And so I started to get frustrated when scientists didn't want to talk about their feelings. Now, I hadn't expected this. Before I joined Story Collider, I didn't really know very many scientists. Ben was the first scientist who I really knew. And so I didn't know a lot about science culture and its emphasis on objectivity and the way that it really discourages expressions of vulnerability or passion or things that might give someone the impression that you're a human being. Now, I know not all scientists are like this. That's a direct quote. In fact, there are many scientists in this room right now who are amazing natural storytellers. Shout out to my neuroscientists in the audience, especially. But still, if I had a nickel for every time a scientist said to me, facts should speak for themselves, we wouldn't need to have this fundraiser. Drinks would be on me. And so I was frustrated by this. And in our workshop, Liz has this part where she talks about work by this psychologist named Susan Fiske, who studies perception and stereotype formation. Susan's whole thing is that in order to be an effective expert, we need to have 2 qualities. We need to be competent and we need to be warm. We need to be perceived that way. And when she asked the participants of her study to rank professions and types of people according to these traits, guess where scientists ended up on the matrix? Bingo. Very competent, not very warm, which means essentially we trust that they are capable, but not that they have our best interests in mind. And when she asked her, she actually put sensors on her participants' faces and told them things happening to people in these different quadrants. And when she told them that people in this cold and competent section here had this bad thing happen to them, like they got splashed by a bus that was passing by, the participants would smile. And I don't have exactly that level of Schadenfreude, but the fact that they smiled did make me smile, which I think maybe is secondhand Schadenfreude. Because there's another part to this story. And I travel around producing these shows, and sometimes when I'm out of town, at a conference running a show or something like that, I'll run a rehearsal prior to the show. And at the end of the rehearsal, sometimes, a senior scientist in the group will turn to another senior male scientist in the group and ask him out to drinks. And then, maybe if there's another, junior male scientist in the group, they'll invite him too. And then, sometimes, on their way out the door, as an afterthought, they might also invite some women scientists who happen to be present. I'm never invited. I know, it's very sad. And, I would tell myself that it didn't really matter because they were probably going to talk about something boring like science anyway. And plus, I had a lot of very important work to do in my hotel room that night. But the truth is, sometimes it made me feel a little bit bad. It made me feel like maybe I was considered not as worthwhile because I didn't have a PhD. And it bothered me because the truth is I really admire scientists, not just for their intelligence, which everybody knows about that, but for their dedication. They go to the bottom of the ocean for their science. They climb mountains. They spend weeks, months, years away from loved ones to gather this data. They go to school for way longer than any normal human being should. And I admire that. And sometimes at the end of the day, I would say to myself, these amazing scientists And sometimes I would use a different word from amazing. Now, shortly after the 2016 election, I think in January, I was working with a scientist who was from another country, and she was coming in to tell a story at a show, at a conference where we were putting on a show. And I had a really hard time getting in touch with her to work on her story, and she ended up not being able to have time to talk to me until just a few days before the show. And when we did get on the phone, and I had to tell her that what she had in mind to talk about was really not a story, it was really more of a lecture, she blew up at me. She yelled at me like I have never been yelled at before, saying, didn't I know who she was? Didn't I understand how important her work was, what I was taking her away from? Didn't she understand that talking to me was a waste of her valuable time? She had so many more important things that she should be doing instead of this. And I'm just listening to this, feeling increasingly frustrated, increasingly small, thinking, what do you think that my motive is here? All I want is to help you tell a good story. I have no other motivation besides that. Contrary to popular belief, I don't get off on torturing scientists emotionally. And then she gets to a part of her rant that makes me sit up and pay attention. She tells me that she has just spent the whole day being detained at the Dallas airport, not knowing when she would be able to leave, being treated like a criminal. And I realized that this is a person who was coming to this conference to present her brilliant, hard-earned work, only to spend this day feeling scared and humiliated when everybody else had no problem making it there. And I realized that she has worked so hard her entire life to make it to this level, only to be treated like a criminal by Americans like me. And the reason that she's telling me who she is and she's telling me her qualifications is because she thinks that I am seeing her in the same way. And so I interject, and I say, I'm sorry that happened to you. And instantly, everything changed. By the time we got to the show, we were smiling, laughing. And after this, I started to think about things differently. It was ironic that while I was getting so frustrated with scientists being focused on their work at the expense of feelings, I was focused on my work at the expense of compassion and understanding. And if I was going to do this, I realized I needed to listen and I needed to understand. And I thought back to those moments when the senior male scientists, would issue their drinks invitations. And this time, I took myself out of the equation. And I thought about how must that woman scientist feel in those moments when these are supposed to be her colleagues and collaborators, and she's being cut out of the conversation. And this was still on my mind when I was working with another scientist from the hard sciences on her story. And she was talking about taking a new job in a new lab. And I was trying really hard to get her to tell me how she felt about this job, how she felt about her colleagues and her work. And I just wasn't getting much out of her at all. And then finally, she broke down and she confessed to me that the truth was she had been the only woman in her lab for years. And that she'd been talked over, she'd been ignored, she'd been cut out of invitations. Some of the men stopped talking to her completely after she rejected their advances. She started doubting whether she had anything worthwhile to say as a scientist, whether she was a legitimate scientist in this lab. She spent time in therapy trying to figure this out. And she said to me, how do I go on stage and talk about this when I still work with all of these people? And I didn't know how to answer that question. And I thought that I had understood what it was to be nervous to tell a story. I thought I had understood the risks of telling a story, but the truth was I had no idea. And it really made me appreciate the fact that telling a story like this on our stage is an act of courage. And the scientists tell these stories because they care. They want to change the system. They know that there are other scientists like them who are experiencing the same things. Scientists who are risking everything to get an education. Scientists who are denied opportunities because of where they were born. Scientists who are denied opportunities because of the gender or their color of their skin. Scientists who are dealing with untreated mental illness. Scientists who are struggling to be seen as capable because they have a disability. Scientists who are harassed because they are standing up for underrepresented people in STEM.
What I need is for you to work harder to make the world safe, so that my friends of color, my trans friends, my disabled friends, so that we can focus on our work instead of fighting to exist.
This was a huge wake-up call for me. And I know that this is important because science is better when everyone has a voice and everyone has an opportunity. We've been told it again and again. I started to think about this even more when a climate scientist broke down in tears in one of our workshops. And it made me think about the fact that many of the people on the front lines of the biggest problems and issues that our country and our world are facing today, they're scientists. Whether it's the Flint water crisis.
So I was really, really angry, livid, in fact. How could the state of Michigan's Department of Environmental Quality, MDEQ, insist that the water in Flint, Michigan was safe to drink? What kind of data did they have? Because our scientific evidence showed there was a clear problem.
Or police violence.
I also thought about my own life and how Philando could have been one of my friends, could have been one of my relatives, could have been me. I've been pulled over 30 times in my life by the police. I've been thrown up against the wall, thrown on the ground. I've been arrested. I've had to go to court, and I don't have a criminal record. And I have a PhD, and I work at one of the top universities in the country.
Or climate change.
And I have a daughter, and I wake up in the middle of the night, at first to feed her, and then later in an absolute state of panic about the world we're leaving her. And I get up in the morning, and I get dressed, and I go to work.
Or drug addiction.
He said when he wakes up tomorrow, he's still going to be here, whether he's high or not, so he might as well be high. And then that made me think of all the kind of suffering that these people are dealing with, these feelings of abandonment, of hopelessness. And it became overwhelming. I thought, I can't do this anymore. I got to quit. I'm just going to leave. They won't notice.
I wish that everybody could know scientists like I know scientists, like everyone at Story Collider knows scientists. Because I think that if they did, they would trust them and they would support them. And that's become the thing that drives my work today. And now when I get frustrated, it's because I can't do more to solve these problems. And I'm just one person in a small organization. I can't solve the culture of science. I can't solve the culture of our country, of our world. All I can do is listen and help people tell their stories and elevate their voices as best as I can. And I know that that's important, but a lot of the time it doesn't feel like enough. It starts to feel like you're a little bit powerless sometimes. And so that's why Liz and I were so excited when we got an email from a scientist named Jeff Shinsky. Jeff Shinsky published a study where he had community college students listen to our stories over the course of their semester. And this is what he found. Now, in case you don't speak scientist, I'll break it down for you in plain English. What this says is that these students who listened to our stories came away with a different perception of who could be a scientist. They felt like they could see a place for themselves in science. They expressed more interest in science. They even got a better grade in the class. And that was huge for us. I actually, for the first time ever, I cried reading a scientific paper. Okay, let's be honest. For the first time ever, I read a scientific paper. Because what this meant is that we can make a difference just by telling and sharing these stories. And that's huge. That is so huge to us. So I want to thank everyone who has ever told a story at our show. Not just the very serious, deep ones, but also the small stories. The stories about high school, science fair volcanoes, the stories like the ones Josh told tonight about penis spray. Because it's all part of it, right? Yeah, all of this is part of it. And I want to thank all of the doctors, the lawyers, the bartenders, the burlesque dancers, the comedians, the journalists. I want to thank all of them. But most of all, I want to thank these fucking amazing scientists. Thank you.